Alright everybody, and welcome back to the management module. And for today's section we're going to be talking a little bit about behavior management. It goes a little bit beyond kind of some of the traditional stuff, really into the realm of more organizational psych, some operant and conditioning type stuff, but we're just going to cover it at a very high level, really for the specific purpose of providing everyone some additional tools in being able to do effective problem solving primarily. And so when we look at managing behavior, there's really kind of the primary question of why is it important, why is it relevant to manage behavior. And there's a couple key things that go into that. Number one, being able to have good repeatable behavior is important for being able to execute processes effectively and accurately. Beyond just being able to do it once, being able to manage good behaviors, repeatable, reliable behaviors, is critical to being able to achieve repeatable results with any of our processes that we're designing and that we're setting up. And then again, as I mentioned before, in terms of a problem-solving tool, being able to manage and adjust and modify and correct behaviors is a very, very important skill in being able to problem solve effectively, specifically in the context of the bad behavior barrier. And what I mean by the bad behavior barrier is the kind of roadblock that we run into typically when we get into a situation and it kind of devolves into just being a people problem. So an attitude issue or a personnel issue that there's just nothing we can do with. We either have to live with it or we have to switch people. That's really the bad behavior barrier, feeling like we can't overcome that. And what we want to do in this section is talk a little bit about some of the ways that we can understand and transition away from kind of the traditional standpoint of viewing things as people problems and really be able to move it into and view it as a process problem so that we can address and manage and improve and design and develop behavioral processes just like we can any other technical process within the organization. And so the next thing we want to look at in terms of after, kind of why we want to manage it is kind of to define for the context of this section what behavior is specifically. And kind of at its core level, behavior is any observable or measurable human activity. So it can be good or bad, it can be productive or unproductive. In the context of lean, it can definitely be value added or not value added. And kind of the key point out of it, as I hit on earlier, is that behavior, human behavior, can be quantified and managed just like any other system that we deal with. Just because we're dealing with people doesn't mean that we have to necessarily handle it and treat it any differently than if we were dealing with some of these other technical skills, pull systems, things like that. And so in the context of managing behavior, there's a couple things that we want to run through. Number one, we want to make sure we have a proper environment so that our team members are capable of understanding and knowing what good behaviors are and being able to tell good from bad behaviors. We want to make sure that we're managing behavior objectively, so it's based off data and facts versus opinions, things of that nature. We also want to be able to understand how we identify causes of behavior, what drives bad behavior and behaviors that we don't want. And the reason we want to understand how to see those causes is because that gives us insights on how we can develop plans to change that behavior. So the first thing we want to take a look at is creating the right environment to allow us to be able to manage behavior effectively. And there's kind of a checklist of things that we want to make sure that we're doing first before we start getting into some of the higher level things. Number one, again, building the infrastructure, is that we want to make sure that we have clearly defined roles and responsibilities so that all team members, everyone knows what they should be doing and when they should be doing it and how they coordinate and interact between each other. The way we typically handle this is with standardized work. We cover that in one of the technical tools sections. And now this is one of kind of the critical applications of it, why it's important to be able to do that, not just as a process design tool, but actually how we can manage it and as a valuable tool for our team members to be able to understand what their expectations are. The next thing that we want to be able to do is we want to make sure that we're tracking our results, and not just tracking it, but being able to provide our team members with immediate feedback. So if they deviate from the behaviors we want them to follow, they can see the immediate negative results of that. So we handle that in a lean context with our KPIs. We cover that in the next module, in the measurement module. But again, bringing it back, this is one of the key applications of why it's so valuable to be able to provide that immediate feedback in real time to our team members on the shop floor. One of the other things that we want to do is we want to make sure that they're managing and getting the right results in the right way. And the reason I point that out in terms of the method is that it's not we want to get away from situations where we just say, get it done, we don't care how it happens. And we want to be able to make sure that we're operating within a framework that we're getting the results that we want, but we're also monitoring to make sure that we're doing it by following the right procedures. Continuing on, just kind of a couple more key points. We also want to make sure that in our environment we're working in a team environment. What we find in a lot of situations traditionally is that you'll have individuals that are connected process-wise, but still view themselves very much in their own silo. This is my area of responsibility, this is my check sheet, this is my quota, what I have to get out, and as long as I meet my numbers, then that's all that matters. And we really want to transition out of that individual environment into a nice team environment so people understand how they interact with each other, and it's clear how they interact with each other. One of the other things we want to make sure we're being responsible as managers is with goal selection for our team members. We want to provide people a challenge, but we also want to make sure that we're providing realistic and attainable goals. If we're asking people to do impossible things, then we're not going to be able to see the results and the behaviors that we want to be able to cultivate. And then the last thing out of that is that we want to make sure that we're using correct reinforcement. And reinforcement is kind of a buzzword that I'm sure lots of people have heard, are familiar with. Positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement. Basically, all we want to talk about it in this context is just that we want to be careful that we reinforce the behaviors that we want more of, and not reinforce the behaviors that we're trying to diminish. And as an example of that, say for safety reasons on a factory floor that the team members need to be wearing safety glasses. If I'm the supervisor, I walk out, I see someone without their safety glasses on, and I let it go, well, now I've just reinforced to that individual that that's okay to do. And we're going to see more of that behavior, right? So we want to make sure that we're responsible about managing and reinforcing the right behaviors. So the next thing, once we've kind of got some of those key things in terms of the environment in place, so our team members are set up with the tools and resources around them to successfully be able to reproduce repeatably the right behaviors that we're looking for, we want to make sure that the behaviors we're asking people to do, right, the tasks, the way they go about doing their processes, those behaviors, that those are actually determined objectively based off data versus just subjective opinions of mine or someone else's or any individual based off experience or what we think. And really we want to be able to do that so that it's clear what the standard is, it's clear to everyone why we're doing the things that we're doing, and that the behaviors that we're looking for to run our processes, we can tie it back to the ultimate business need to make sure we're always working on what we need to be working on when we need to be working on it. And so to be able to kind of run a quick exercise in terms of being able to determine, you know, are we being objective, are we being subjective, there's a quick little exercise I like to do. Do we think or do we know, basically. And when we look at it, there's kind of a couple different ways that we can go when we go down this checklist. But basically, if we're looking at, here's a target behavior that we've identified, and we're trying to determine, is this an objectively good behavior that we're going after, or is this just based off my opinion, what I think would be best? And so we can ask, do we think or do we know? If we think, thinking is generally based off my experience. I did this one time, so I think that'll be great. I think it'll work well. Versus do we know, here's the data, here's what we've monitored off the process. This is what the process and our results are telling us are most effective. Not my opinion, this is based off current condition, real values. We can look at, do we think or do we know? Is it just my opinion, or is this something that's widely accepted as fact within the organization or beyond? Again, we want to make sure that we're moving out of the realm of opinions and into the realm of real data-driven facts when we're trying to identify these target behaviors that we're going to ask our team members to do. One of the other things, do we think, do we know? Was this an obvious solution that we just stopped at, or did we really kind of question what was going on to make sure we were understanding the real root cause before identifying the proper procedures and the right behaviors that we're going to ask our team members to do? Same thing, do we think, do we know? Is it kind of a general thing that we're asking them to do, improve your quality, or is it a more specific and focused behavior? We want you to take steps A, B, and C to improve your quality, right? So making sure, again, going back to good realistic goals that are achievable for people. And then the last thing, do we think or do we know? You know, if it's an opinion, if it's something that we think, it'll change with time based off new experience and as we go through and we learn a little bit about what's happening, versus if we know, that's reliable and that's consistent. Facts are generally pretty persistent. Opinions change pretty frequently. So these really kind of do we think, do we know, it's really just a guideline in trying to understand, are we being objective about the things that we're asking people to do, or is it just we're having an argument of opinions and then asking our team members to do 9 different things, right? It's very, very important. And so once we've established the proper environment, so our team members are supported, once we understand that the target behaviors we're expecting people to do are really based off the actual business need, based off actual data, and not just extraneous opinion, things like that. And if we're still having issues with bad behavior at that point, because making sure we're asking people to do the right thing and making sure they're in an environment to be successful will take care of most of it. But if we're still seeing behaviors, bad behaviors that we want to correct, the next thing we can do is we can start looking a little bit more deeply at what's driving these behaviors, because now we know it's not the environment, we know it's not situational. And so at the core of it, in terms of human behavior, really in a basic sense, what drives behavior is the results of previous behavior. So if you or I do something and the consequences of it are good, we're going to be more likely to do that again in the future. Converse of if the consequences are negative. And so to kind of walk through an example of analyzing behavior a little bit, we'll take a quick example, and this is a pretty typical one. Say we have a line operator somewhere that's disobeying the procedure and using his or her own method to accomplish their task. Pretty typical, we see it a lot. And so if we take a look at that behavior, the behavior of not following the procedures, let's dig a little bit deeper and let's look at what the consequences of not following the procedure are. So we've got a couple different ones listed out, and again, this is just an example. But let's say for a line operator, when they change to do their own method, they get a little bit higher output off the line. Now, if the supervisor happens to walk by and see them, they will get scolded for not following the procedures. That's pretty typical. What does happen if they change their procedure is that down the road, the quality of the product that we're delivering is diminished because we're not manufacturing it the right way, we're not producing it the right way. One of the other things that comes out of it is that for the team member, when they go home at the end of the day, if they do it the way they want, there's less physical strain on them. They're less sore at the end of the day. And then, of course, down at the end, if they continue to not follow the procedures at their annual review, they will get a bad review. So those are the consequences of it, but yet the bad behavior is there. So what's really driving it? And what we can do is we can pull the consequences back up, but let's analyze those consequences to see how they impact the line leader, the team member. So the first thing we want to do is ask ourselves, are these positive or negative consequences? Again, this is from the perspective of the individual. So in this example, from the perspective of the line leader, are they positive or negative to that person? Not what we think, but to that person. And so we can run through really quick. Is a higher output? Well, for the line leader, if it's all based off getting things out the door, higher output is a good thing for them. Now, if they get scolded by the supervisor, that's negative. Worse quality, that's negative. Less physical strain is a positive thing for the team member, and a bad review, of course, is negative. So then we can ask ourselves, well, do these consequences happen immediately, or are they in the future? And when we run back through, higher output is immediate. Scolded by the supervisor is immediate if they get caught. The worst quality, though, because maybe they don't find out about that for a couple days, a couple weeks, maybe a couple months. Well, that's in the future. Less physical strain, that's immediate. They know as soon as they go home. And a bad review, again, it's annual. That's sometime in the future. So then let's take it one step deeper and say, well, are these consequences certain or uncertain? And so with the higher output, that is certain. We know at the end of the day that will always happen. Scolded by the supervisor, though, that depends if you get caught. So that's uncertain. Worse quality, again, because we don't really know if the team member, the line leader, is going to get feedback back. That's uncertain. They may not know if the quality was diminished because no one ever told them. Less physical strain, though, is certain. They know that when they go home. And then bad review, maybe we're not always so timely about it. Maybe they'll get a bad review, maybe they won't. Maybe they won't get a review at all, right? So that's uncertain too. And so when we look at consequences, consequences matter in terms of how they drive behavior. And not all these types of consequences that we talked about, immediate or in the future, certain or uncertain, positive or negative, they don't all impact behavior equally. And so if we pull up this little rough chart, it kind of from least powerful to most powerful in terms of how types of consequences drive and create and encourage future behaviors. Positive future uncertain, negative future uncertain. Things that will happen some point in the future, but maybe will happen, maybe they won't. they don't really do a lot to impact behavior. The next step up, positive future certain, negative future certain. The big difference is it's still in the future, but we know it will happen, right? So it's more important, more impactful in driving behavior. Negative immediate uncertain is in that same category. The next step up is positive immediate uncertain. So you're noticing a trend here. Things that happen immediately drive behavior more than things that happen in the future. And then of course the greatest, most powerful impact is positive immediate and certain and negative immediate and certain. If it happens right away, and it will always happen right away, that will have a much greater impact on future behavior than any other type of consequence. So what does this mean in terms of our example? Well, let's pull the consequences back up. We'll pull the analysis that we did on the different types of consequences up. And what I've done here is I've actually sorted them in terms of most to least powerful consequences. And what we see is that the higher output and the less physical strain from the team member's perspective, the line leader, positive, immediate, and certain. Powerful things to drive behavior. And those are all things that we don't want to be happening, right? Those are positive consequences for doing the wrong thing. And they're powerful positive consequences for doing the wrong thing, the bad behavior. And then what you see down low, scolded by the supervisor, worse quality, bad review, some of the things that we're trying to do, which is not uncommon, to correct the bad behavior. Look at the power of those consequences. Negative future uncertain, negative future uncertain, negative immediate uncertain. So the power of the things that we're trying to do to correct the behavior is less than the power of the positive consequences the team member gets directly from doing the bad behaviors. And when that's the case, it's very simple. The future behavior is going to see continually not following the procedures, right? But now the difference is we can see why that behavior is happening, right? We can move it away from it's an attitude problem, it's a person problem, they just don't like doing it, they just don't work well with others. Now we can break down the consequences of their behavior and see exactly why they're doing what they're doing and why the things that we're trying to do to change it aren't having an effect. And so once we do that, once we can visualize and see what's causing the behavior, now we can start to work towards changing it. And we do that by changing the value of the consequences. There's two ways we can do that. We can add value to behaviors that we want, positive reinforcement there, or we can remove value from the behaviors that we don't want. Pretty straightforward. And so we'll pull the list of consequences back up again. This is how it sits with our current condition from the previous slide. And now let's take a look at what we can do to start changing the value of those consequences. For the first one, higher output, well, let's put some things in place so we can contain overproduction better. We'll talk about that in some of the technical tools sections in that module. But basically what we can do by that then is put something in place so that for the line leader, when they overproduce, there's an immediate negative consequence. They see right away that they've overproduced and done something wrong, and we can change that from a positive to a negative by how we structure the process to provide information to that line leader. Now the less physical strain, well, that's a great thing. Let's go back through standardized work. Let's see what we can do to change the procedure we're asking the line leader to do so that it's less physically stressful. And if we can do that, now we've essentially turned that consequence into a moot point. It's equally physically demanding no matter which way they do it. If we take a look at scolded by the supervisor, that is negative, it is immediate, but it's uncertain because we're not consistent about it. So let's run more frequent audits while we're trying to correct this behavior so that we can change that uncertain to certain. Now we also have the other two things of worse quality and a bad review. Well, again, tying back to the KPIs, let's work towards providing the line leader more timely feedback so that they can see exactly what's happening. So that worse quality, negative future uncertain, let's transition it to negative immediate and certain. They will know right away if there's a depreciation in quality because they've deviated from the procedure. For the same thing for the bad review, let's make sure that we always do it in a timely manner so that it's not uncertain in the future, it's certain, right? We can change the value of the consequences based off what changes we make to our processes. So the result of that is we'll pull the chart back up, least to most powerful types of behavior consequences. And now this has been resorted according to how we changed the consequences. And as we can see, we went from having very powerful positive consequences to now very powerful negative consequences. And when we can do that successfully, we can expect that in the future, the line leader will abandon that bad behavior. We've managed to through process changes, change the way the consequences, change the value of those behavior consequences, so that now there's nothing positive in there, right? So we can adjust the behavior that way. And the key point out of this is that it's a method to correct the process, right? We're not correcting people. We can correct our process so that it dictates and helps shape the behaviors that we want, right? It's not two isolated system of people and process. We want to make sure our process encourages and reinforces people to do the behaviors we want to execute the process effectively. It's an integrated system, a common theme through a lot of this lean material. And so in summary, if we just kind of look at the key steps on how we want to manage behaviors, there's just a couple of them. We want to make sure that we've created the proper support environment, right? That's first. We need to make sure we have a good environment where people can get feedback, they understand what the correct processes are, and they're supported and empowered to be successful. The second things we want to do is we want to make sure that any behaviors that we're asking people or any behaviors that we're expecting people to do have been chosen objectively. It's not just because myself or someone else or anyone thinks that this is a good idea to do. We're basing it off real data. We're basing it off the business need. That's why we need individuals to do these behaviors and execute the process in this manner. Now, if we're still having bad behavior issues beyond that, then we can start looking at identifying the causes of those behaviors, right? Analyzing the consequences, seeing what the consequences are to see why people are continuing to exhibit these bad behaviors. And then once we can see the problem, then we can develop an implementation plan to adjust the value of those consequences and start to correct and shape the bad behaviors and transition it into the good behavior that we want to see exhibited. And the key point out of here, again, I've hit on it a couple times, is this idea of do we think or do we know, especially in dealing with behavior. It's very easy, it's very tempting. It's generally the default setting to say it's a people problem. It's an attitude problem. There's nothing we can do about it. We either have to deal with it or get a new person, right? Because we think that, because we don't understand how we can see and how we can adjust these behaviors. And really the whole point of this section is to give us an opportunity to move away from what we think and have a new set of tools so that we can start understanding, we can start learning, and we can start knowing what's going on, why bad behaviors are happening, and what we can do to break through that bad behavior barrier and start to correct these types of issues. And so, as always, any questions, please just direct them through the website, and we'll see everybody for the next section. Thank you.